Good evening. I'm sure that most of you know that any teaching has to be conducted in steps, because there are states and stages of consciousness, and we are prepared at one time for a teaching and at another time for something further or deeper. And still further along in our experience, we begin to get ready for some of the mysteries of life. Now, ordinarily speaking, metaphysical teaching consists only of the veneer of the subject, of the very, you might say, outside layer. There is very little metaphysical teaching that goes any deeper than what I would call primary grades. Most of it is in the realm of kindergarten, and some little of it is on the level of primary grades. I don't know of any teaching available to the public that I can think of that goes any deeper than what might comparatively be called fourth grade or fifth grade schooling. And the reason is that spiritual truth is shocking. Spiritual truth can hardly be accepted at all by a human being until they have had sufficient light to lift them above that primary grade of receptivity. This is likewise true of mental teachings. I don't know of any mental teachings that go any further than what would seem to me to be primary grade teaching. And for the same reason, that if the truth were known about the mind, no, I wouldn't say that, the truth is known, but if the truth were taught openly about the mind, there would be far too much of people hurting themselves by experiments for which they were not prepared, and then there would also be too much use of mind power in wrong directions. Probably it is for this reason that the truth about the mind doesn't at all reach the public, whereas the truth about the spirit doesn't reach it, because it wouldn't be comprehended. It is available, but it has to be found, and then it isn't understood until one is prepared for it. Now, I can illustrate that by answering this question first. And incidentally, I might tell you this, that before coming into this room, I was upstairs meditating. And in my meditation, the subject of this class tonight unfolded in its completeness. Then when I read these questions, I know right well that I was in tune with this group of students, and it's a natural thing that these questions should be here. But I'm not yet quite so certain that you will accept the answers. Well, that will depend on your own inner being and how far you have come. Now here's the first question. How can spiritual harmony be established in the functioning of mechanical or electrical equipment? Is it possible to prevent mechanical or electronic parts from wearing out or becoming defective? Now, just think how far your understanding will have to go for you to accept the fact that to a certain degree the answer is yes. It can be so. You see how at first it seems absolutely improbable and impossible that the functioning of mechanical or electrical equipment is possible through these studies. Now actually, it cannot be done spiritually, but it can be done mentally. I cannot tell you how many times I have had students tell me and write me of experiences of their automobile getting out of order in some serious way, and yet they're being able to go as far as a garage or the next stop, and then to be told that it was absolutely impossible for them to reach there. That the brake or whatever it was of such a nature that the car absolutely could not have reached there, but here it is. Or how many times I have been told of experiences of those who have run out of gas and kept going until they reached the next station where they could find it. Now, of course, I know that to the human mind this is impossible, and it is for this reason that these things cannot be taught more openly than they are. I'm going to go another step and tell you this, that this question came up not about mechanical things, but about living things in Seattle, in one of our classworks. And I set out to show the students what could be done. Now, on Sunday, the entire center was fixed up with beautiful cut roses. They were on the platform and on the sides of the church and in the back of the church. And more cut roses were in my study, in that center. And I said that if I can prove this, these roses in this study will be just as fresh when we finish this class on Saturday night as they are today on Sunday. And that's the way they were. They hadn't opened, they were still buds, and they were still fresh. Those outside weren't. This is not a spiritual demonstration. This is a proof that what we call matter isn't matter at all, it's mind. It's mind information. It is mind expressed. And the reason I knew that was that I know what mind is, and I have seen how it functions in the body. Now remember this. There are 3 states of consciousness. That is the material sense, the mental, and the spiritual. In the days before the middle of the last century, this was considered a material universe to such an extent that even materia medica practice was almost entirely material. It was the application of remedies, whether pills or powders or liquid, or herbs, or plasters, or heat or cold, but practically all of the medical practice was material, as if your body were a piece of matter, something had gotten out of order, and the doctors are going to take that material body and in some way get it back functioning. And that was about the major mode of practice of the healing art. Now, in the middle, or before the middle of the last century, no, before that, it was in the century before, that Anton Mesmer discovered the relationship between mind and body. And he performed experiments and he did healing work by an essence of mind which in some way governed the action of the body. And evidently he was successful enough with it in Germany that he was invited to England and to France. And he must have had quite some success there, because he was driven out of business by those who felt it was probably too competitive. However, because there was a grain of truth in his teaching, it couldn't die. And so, between that and the last century, a greater unfoldment took place as to the relationship between mind and body, or what you would call mind and matter. And so there was introduced into the world teachings like originally Christian Science, which was mind over matter, New Thought, which was mind over matter or mind controlling matter, psychology, psychiatry, is that it? Psychiatry, and psychosomatic medicine. In all of these, the power of the mind is recognized as having something to do with the harmony of the body. Now, it isn't necessary at this point to say that there are some erroneous concepts in all of those teachings. There are. And that part of those teachings which are incorrect will ultimately be corrected. But it is recognized universally now that there is a relationship between mind and body. Now, as some of the Christian Science teaching through Mrs. Eddy evolved, another step was taken, and it became known that there is a relationship between God, spirit, and the body, health, and the mind. Here is a newspaper article quoting Dr. C.G. Jung, the psychiatrist. And he says this: among all my patients in the second half of life, every one of them fell ill because he had lost what the living religions of every age have given their followers. And none of them has been really healed who did not regain his religious outlook. So you see that with the recognition of that nature and the recognition of the nature of spiritual healing itself, we do know that that which is called spirit or God does function in the mental life and in the physical life. Now, in the days when there was only the subject of body as matter and remedies as matter, the world was living in that particular dimension, material dimension, and living totally unaware of the fact that it was surrounded with a mental universe, a mental consciousness, a mental dimension. Oh, that was ignored. Everything was matter and materiality, material force and material power, and here we were surrounded all of this time with a tremendous mental force. So then, from the 1800s up to this present time, we find that more and more is becoming known about the mental universe and its activities. Now, unfortunately, for this particular era, there is a mistaken idea loose in the world that the mental realm and the spiritual realm are the same one, that the realm of God and the realm of mind is the same. And this is leading to quite disastrous results. Mainly because as long as this belief persists, there will be teachings combining the spiritual and the mental and going nowhere, actually preventing progress because of their failure. One of these that I can point to is the New Thought movement, which in the last 30 years has dropped 90%. There is not 10% of the New Thought activity in the world today that there was 30 years ago. And the main reason is this very mistake, that they're continuously using God and mind as if they were synonyms. They're using God power and mental power as if they were the same thing, and they're just getting nowhere with it. Now, this same mistake has, within the last 10 or 15 years, been brought into the religious world. And believe it or not, there are teachings circulating in the churches that would indicate or teach the people that mind power is God power. One of the tragedies that comes out of this is really the years that are lost before those mistakes are corrected. I had occasion short time ago to mention this, that a minister has written a book about the power of prayer in plant life. A minister of the church. And in this book, he reveals the experiments in which he instructed a group of people how to pray for the plants over here and make them grow and flourish beyond their natural growth, and taught another group over here how to pray so as to wither them and destroy them. And this led him to the conclusion that prayer, properly understood, can be destructive as well as constructive. Now, when I say to you that this is sad, that this is tragic, you must understand why I say it. The power of God is all good, and no one can ever use the power of God for a selfish purpose, for a personal purpose, for a destructive purpose, for it cannot be done. The nature of God is good. The nature of God is love. The nature of God is life eternal. And no one on the face of the globe will ever be able to pray or to make use of spiritual powers for a selfish purpose or a destructive purpose. And that is why so many of the so-called prayers of the world are powerless. They're prayers to do this for me or for my child or for my nation or for my soldiers. And there can't be answers to such prayers because God cannot be used in that way. God is a universal good, the same today, tomorrow, and forever. And in the sight of God there is neither Greek nor Jew, bond nor free. And anyone who attempts by any manner of means to utilize the power of good for a personal, a selfish, or a destructive purpose might just as well be touching a hot wire. They're on the way to self-destruction. God is no respecter of persons. God's rain falls on the just and the unjust. God's presence is the power of forgiveness to every phase of discord, whatever its name or nature. Now, this minister was not mistaken in that these plants did grow and these were destroyed. His mistake was believing that it was spiritual power or prayer or contact with God that was responsible for either one of them, for God wasn't. Anyone could duplicate that experiment that wanted to work at it a little way. It is entirely mental. Now, the modus operandi of it is this. Mind, your mind or anybody's mind, imbued with truth, will produce harmony. Mind, the same mind, imbued with ignorance or error, will produce an opposite effect. This we learn long centuries before modern civilization entered the picture. The Aborigines of Australia are especially gifted in both healing and cursing. They can heal and they can kill. They know how to bring health to an individual, and they know how to strike them dead with mental power, not by turning to God. I have said this over and over again until some people really believe I'm anti-Semitic. I'm really not. But I must repeat this, that it was the ancient Hebrew God that you could appeal to destroy your enemy. God didn't do it, but the Hebrews believed that God did or that God would. But that is no fit prayer or modern civilized thought or belief that the power of that which created the universe and maintains it and sustains it so perfectly can be called upon to destroy it. No, it is not the power of spirit, but the power of mind. Now, the Hawaiians, until the missionaries came here, could also heal and could also kill. They had their good kahunas with the gift of healing. They had their bad kahunas to whom you could go and have your enemies murdered. And doubt not that your enemies died if you went to those kahunas. They did, because the kahunas knew how to do it. So do the hexers in Pennsylvania. So do some of the old Central and South American tribes. And down in the South Seas, the power of the mind was so well known that if someone or some ship or group landed on one end of the island, everyone instantly knew it on the other end of the island. That wasn't a power of God, that was a mental power, and it is one which can be duplicated. Anyone can train the mind to any degree, and for good or for evil. No one really knows the extent of the power of the mind. No one has ever experimented to a far enough degree to learn what the actual power of the mind is. I had the pleasure and privilege of being taught by a teacher who taught me how to leave this body and how to travel to any part of the globe that I wanted to be in. And for many years I enjoyed that experience practically every night, wandering out into this world. Not that it proved anything from a spiritual standpoint. It merely proved that the mind is not encased in a body. To me, that was only the step leading up to the realization that I am not in this body. I am not in this room. I do not occupy space. I cannot be confined either in time or space, and I can transcend either at any time, spiritually, but only because I learned first that the mind is not confined to this shell. Now, the mind can read other minds. The mind can read minds close at hand and far apart. The mind, when it transcends itself, often as in wartime, when mothers are almost living with their sons thousands of miles away at the front, mothers over and over and over again know actually what is happening and when it's happening at the front. Mothers know more about their children than the Army Board does, because in living in such identification with them, they transcend their own limitations of body and find themselves in far places. Now, the body is not, the mind is not something separate and apart from body. The mind is not something separate and apart from that plant. The mind actually is the very substance of body. Mind is actually the essence and the activity of body, and it is for this reason, leaving God out of the picture entirely, that you can work on the purely mental level and produce healings and produce harmony. There is one metaphysical teacher who has taught for years and years mind healing merely from the standpoint of mind and body, and of how mind, when it is holding to certain truths, can produce an effect upon the body. Now, anyone who will stay away from trying to mix up spirit and mind and remain purely on the mental level can produce harmony in their bodies, in their business, in all of the affairs of their life, as long, and this is of course the major requisite, as long as they maintain their integrity. In other words, as long as they never try to use their mind power selfishly, injuriously, or to anyone else's discomfort. as long as they remain pure of mind, using this power only for the purpose of producing harmony, whether in themselves or others. There's nothing selfish about producing harmony in oneself, because harmony is the normal, natural state of being. But to produce harmony at someone else's expense, or to use the powers destructively, is, of course, a sin against the Holy Ghost. It must result inevitably in harm to the one who does it. Now, it has been done. People have used the power of their mind to get other people's money and other people's property and other people's business. They have used the power of mind to benefit themselves at the expense of others. It is a destructive thing, but don't for a minute doubt that it can be done. Otherwise, you will be living with your head in the sand. Now, the mind has two powers, and that is good and evil. Do you not understand that this body in and of itself can never be good or bad? Do you not know, you probably haven't thought of it, but you can now, that your body can't steal? Do you know that your body in and of itself can't be immoral, or do an immoral thing, or commit an immoral act? Don't you know that? Of course you do. There has to be a mind, there has to be something you call I, and all the body can do is carry out the instructions of the mind. And if the mind says give, the body gives, the hand gives. If the mind says withhold, then the hand withholds. And if the mind says steal, then the hand steals or tries to. And so it is. The mind is always governing the body on the human level. It is only the person too steeped in mental inertia who lets the body control the mind. Then we have a kleptomaniac. They can't help it. Their hand just reaches out and steals, although the mind doesn't want it to. But the mind has no control over that body. And there are people of sensual appetites who cannot control their appetite, whether for drink or for drugs or for food, and all branches. They have no control over their body. Their body has control over them. But that is because they have surrendered the power of their own mind, and they've let the body run away with it, as you might let a garden run away and become overrun with weeds if you're too lazy to get out there and take care of it. But normally, the mind can't steal, the body can't steal, the body can't overeat or overdrink, the body can't do anything of itself if there is enough control so that you know that, no, I govern the action of this body. That I being me through the mind. Now then, it is so with health. Health can be maintained mentally by keeping the mind imbued with truth. The mind imbued with truth will create and maintain health in the body. Mind imbued either with ignorance or error permits the body to disintegrate and to develop its ill health. But remember, this is all on the mental plane. Now, because there is an interrelation between spirit, mind, and body, in our stage of unfoldment, we cannot reach the spiritual level without first going through the mind. There are a few exceptions to that. There have been some people receive divine grace and automatically are imbued with the Spirit without ever having to learn the truth of being. sometimes without ever learning it in their lifetime, and yet always living spiritually. But there are not many such, and it would be foolish for us to wait around to see if that particular spiritual lightning was going to strike us. We may as well acknowledge this, that for us, we will have to reach the spiritual levels through the mind, but not using the mind as mind power as you would do if you were going to heal just mentally, but use the mind as an avenue of awareness through which you learn truth, the letter of truth, and then by that learning and practicing the letter of truth, you develop your soul powers or spiritual powers, and then ultimately get beyond the need for even the use of the mind in that direction. Now, don't ever believe that you want to get rid of the mind. That was one of the old Christian Science mistakes, trying to nullify the mind or the body. Let's not get rid of the mind or of the body. Let's have both mind and body for their proper usage. The body is an instrument in which we are now functioning, or through which we are now functioning. It's a very handy instrument when you want to walk down the street or drive a car or go somewhere. It's a very wonderful thing to have eyes to see with and ears to hear with, and a mouth to tongue to speak with. It's all beautiful. Let's not try to get rid of it. It's a wonderful thing to have a mind that functions clearly and intelligently. Let's not try to get rid of it. The one thing in this work that is taught in the infinite way is, do not use the mind as a power, because then you're leaving yourself back on this mental physical plane without consideration for the highest and the real, which is the spiritual. When you reach the spiritual plane, both mind and body are instruments for God. Then there's no limit to the understanding, the inspiration, the art, the literature, the music, the invention, the science that can come through a mind that has made contact with God. No limitation whatsoever. Now, you can't do that strictly on the mental plane. You cannot. You can increase its skill and ability, but only to the extent of the limitations of mind itself. But once you open yourself to the higher consciousness, there is absolutely no limit to what can be revealed in and through your mind and then brought forth by the skill of your fingers or your body. So it is that in answering this question, actually, I doubt that it could be demonstrated that you could maintain mechanical or electrical equipment very long through mental means, although I am absolutely convinced that it can be done throughout any period when it is of necessity to our experience. In other words, if we run out of gasoline, I am definitely convinced that we can run that car until gasoline is available, although I don't believe that we can stop using gasoline entirely and depend on the activity of mind. And so it is that in the case of a brake, I'm certain that our activity would in some way hold it together until we could arrive at the place where it could be corrected. But I doubt very much if we could continue to use it very long without disaster. Now, the same is true of this plant life. By mental means, you can increase your crops and by mental means you can decrease them. But to bring forth a permanent demonstration of multiplication of the loaves and fishes, it would be necessary to go further than the operation of mind. It would be necessary to be touched or to reach the realm of spirit. Then there is no limitation, but neither would there be a violation of natural law. In other words, you might double the amount of flowers on this plant, but it would not be in violation of nature. It would be because something in nature itself that is not now being used would be brought into use. In other words, the fullness of the life of this plant may not now be in action. The activity of the Spirit would see to it that every seed came alive and bore fruit. Mrs. Eddy wrote in, I believe it's in the textbook, that the day will come when the thief will not have to enter your home, but you will carry your goods to the thief. I'm sure that's not often quoted, and I'm sure there are not many people who believe it. But I'm sure now that in the view of the success that was originally had by subliminal perception, you must know that it's true. If the powers of the mind are used in that direction, you can be made to deliver yourself and your property. You say this is frightening. Of course it is. Of course it is. That's why England has absolutely refused to permit the practice of subliminal advertising in England. The Advertising Society of Great Britain has refused permission for it to be used. The government has refused. The radio, the television stations have refused. They have unanimously refused to permit its use, because if it can be used to make you give up your money for anything that they wish to advertise, whether or not you need it, whether or not you can afford it. When last month they tried to pass a bill in the California legislature to outlaw its practice, they failed to pass it. The interests behind the advertising were too strong. And it is now legal to do all the stealing you want in California as long as you do it mentally, if you can do it. Now, it is frightening. It must be frightening to you when you see an exhibition of hypnotism, to know that one man or woman can control the mind and body of as many people as are available. That should be frightening to anybody, and it should be outlawed. It should be outlawed in medicine. Regardless of what good it could accomplish, the ill that it can accomplish far outweighs any good. The practice of hypnotism should be outlawed, because it is the activity of one mind controlling another. Wherein is your freedom? Wherein is your freedom? You say, oh, but you have the choice. You don't have any such thing. If you're ill, you want to get well. And if the price is giving up your mental freedom, you pay it. Now, it is frightening. And to the world uninstructed in spiritual truth, there isn't even a protection unless the law will give it to them. And even the law can't prevent individuals using their own mind any way they want. More especially since it is possible to organize a mental activity and call it religious and get a license from the government. Actually, however, there is a protection against mental powers. And that is the protection which you understand when you understand that the carnal mind is not power, cannot rise above itself, and accept the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods, no other powers, but the one. And as you consciously, remember, consciously, as you consciously live in the realization of God as the only power, the one power, and that so-called human mind, mortal mind, carnal mind, selfish mind, mesmeric mind, hypnotic mind, is not mind, is not God-ordained, is not God-sustained, you are protected. You can't be hypnotized, consciously or unconsciously. You would never respond to subliminal advertising, nor would you ever respond to an individual working on you with their mind. Now, all mental power is not a conscious evil, but that doesn't make it less harmful. For instance, you only have to use the word Hollywood to instantly think of a den of iniquity or Sodom and Gomorrah. And why? Because of what has been taking place there for 25 or 30 years. If you stop to think, you will ask yourself, do all these people who come into the movies or into that theatrical world, are they all evil? Are they all immoral? Are they all bad? Does it attract only bad people? And the answer is no. That industry doesn't attract any more people than our work does, or any other work, dry goods store or building or any other activity. No. But since it caters, as it does, to the flesh, and as it arouses in the minds of audiences throughout the world thoughts of sensuality, lust, all directed at those individuals, men and women on the screen, never doubt for a minute that they feel that and respond to it, and the first thing you know, begin to act it out. Not because they are bad, but because the mental pressure on them is rousing in them that particular activity, that particular response. In the same way, the great stars like Lionel Barrymore, John Barrymore, and several others whom I know, have said that they respond instantly to their audiences. If they have an audience interested in their play, interested in good acting, they rise higher than themselves and give their best performances. And when they are in places where the level of intelligence or art or culture, or whatever it might be, is not at that level, they're going there merely because there's a star or for some other similar reason, they can't rise to that level, and they give consistently bad performances. This is no different than you're walking into an office of somebody in a bad mood, in a bad temper, angry, and so forth, and coming away feeling depressed, or going into the office of a person in good spirits and full of cheer and coming away feeling cheerful. It is the fact that on the ordinary human level of life, we are subject to the mental atmosphere about us. That is why the fears in a burning theater creates a panic, because the people are subject to that mental stress and strain around them and respond to it. It is why on sinking ships you're apt to find more heroism and bravery, because instantly in time of danger there are those who seem to respond in such conditions to heights beyond themselves and lift others with them. In the human picture, then, a mental atmosphere is an important thing. Maintaining oneself in a mental state of purity lets the person out here feel clean. Maintaining oneself in a sense of mental impurity makes the person out here feel unclean and restless and uncomfortable. In the same way, maintaining an integrity in life makes the people out here trust you. Living in an atmosphere of dishonesty and deceit, you breed distrust out here. That's all mental. That is all mental action and reaction. And as I said, much of it not conscious, unconscious. People do not realize the extent to which their mental state affects others. Now, and this is all on the mental plane, you have, and that is one of the major functions of the message of the infinite way, to teach you how to live so as to be unaffected by the mental atmospheres around you, by the mental pressures, by the subliminal suggestions that are floating through the air all the time about infections, contagions, danger, wars, rumors of wars, fear of bombs, how to live above that. That is one of our major points. It comes under the heading of man of earth and man of Christ, man who has his being in Christ, and we're going to continue with that right after we've had a rest from all of this, whatever it is that I've been doing.